let's talk about the worst class in LOTRO. So if you haven't heard already, I am not the biggest fan of Warden in LOTRO, and I know I'm the outlier. I take full blame and responsibility upon myself. It might be for you, and I encourage you to keep playing your Wardens, but yeah, I'm just not there. Anyway, if you not yet heard, Mariner is the new class within LOTRO that everyone is talking about, and I'm sure that you heard a lot of different opinions. So I'm just gonna hop on the bandwagon and tell you mine. This class is definitely more melee driven, and while I was playing it, I found it to be kind of similar to a Warden and Burglar mix. The problem with that is that while I love Burglars, I very much am not a fan of Warden. So I kind of didn't really like Mariner for the reason that it did feel a lot like a Warden. But I'm gonna tell you right now, which is worse, Mariner or Warden? Warden might not be my most disliked class right now. But in this video, we're gonna compare and contrast the difference between the two classes and then figure out which one is going to be on the least liked class of all time on my Lord of the Rings Online class ranks. I'm sure that this is like pressing news for you guys to know what my personal ranking is, but if you find that this video is a little helpful for understanding more of Mariner or Warden, then definitely make sure you hit the subscribe button. It helps the channel out so much, and I appreciate all of your guys' support. It's been such a great journey. Let's get on with the video then. So I want to start by explaining, while Mariner does seem like a Warden, Burglar, and even a little bit of like Hunter Runekeeper-esque parts to it, okay? It is very much an advanced class still, and Mariner can be so overwhelming when you start. So as a new player, I don't know if I'm gonna recommend this class to you right now. It is a lot to take in and a lot to learn. Granted, not as much as Warden, I will say. I will give Mariner a lot of credit there. It is not as overwhelming as Warden is 100%, because it might have taken me a good couple hours to understand Mariner's skills and learn them and get like a feel for the class. Warden, it probably took me a couple hours just understanding the skill combinations for the stinking gambit system, okay? Now I compare Mariner and Warden because of their abilities to have like a good flexibility of defense or evasion, mostly for Mariners, and then also DPS. But not only that, the way that their skill combinations are so tightly knit, like you really need to know what kind of skills or what sort of attacks you want to go in for as Mariner, because that's going to affect like your balance overall for the class, and that's more or less kind of how the gambit system works for Warden. So while I took a long time to explain Mariner, Warden is Warden. Warden is so much like its own thing, I can't even explain it. Like, it's a javelin sort of a character, but I can't compare it to really any other class, which is probably why a lot of people love it. Overall though, just taking the class concepts, I love Mariner a lot more than Warden. I've never been like a javelin shield type of person, like tanks and stuff. That's not my go-to. I would much rather be like a support-based character, and I love the pirate theme. It's so cool. I love sailing all over the whole Middle Earth and basically just, you know, burgling some money. I gotta pay my house mortgage, okay? Now to talk more about like the actual class, abilities, animations, and all of that, I would say that both classes are so intimidating when you start. Warden, you have to learn the whole gambit system. That takes hours and lots of repetitive gameplay to understand just that for Warden. But then you gotta include that this is a melee class that also has a little bit of defense and then also some ranged abilities. So you basically have to like master all three stances, and then learn the gambit skill combinations, and then more or less try to work with that in the gambit system, which is just crazy to me. Mariner don't really have that, though they are super overwhelming because their skills are wordy as heck, and there are a lot of like bonus abilities or ways that other skills interact with the other, and then you have to look at the other skill, and then that skill also interacts with a different sort of skill, so it's just a lot of like cross-referencing, but it takes a lot less time in comparison to the gambit system. A lot less time. And I will say too, understanding like the balance within Mariner as well, that takes some time to kind of get used to, and that's something I'm still getting used to, but that's something that you're gonna find out while you do your gameplay and all of that. In the worst case, you just stun yourself when you're too far over on one side and you get stunned for a couple seconds and then you're back to 0. Like, it's not that punishing in comparison to Wardens, where it's like, oh my gosh, I just messed up like my whole gambit. I need to clear it. And guess what? I have to clear it, so I'm gonna have to click that and then click all the other like skills I need to hit and then make sure that that lines up to the skill I need now. And yeah, it's a lot more processing, a lot more, I guess, like faster recovery that you're gonna need from Warden in comparison to Mariner. Now, I will say that Warden is definitely a very flexible class, hands down. I will never talk bad about Warden's ability to kind of swiftly and quickly change some of what their like skills are. So like, I know like there's like a healing over time sort of skill that I would always use for Warden, and that was always helpful. But like, worst case, if I didn't need that, I could always throw that out and do like a major powerful like DPS ranged ability too. So it was always nice that you had the option to quickly do that, because on other classes you would have a cooldown possibly, and you'd have to wait for that cooldown, and it just takes a little longer. I will say that Warden is still the most flexible. Mariner is definitely kind of in competition though, because there was a lot of feedback I saw on the forums about the skills were just so quick, like you didn't really have to wait for cooldowns, and I've experienced that in my gameplay. Like, some of the skills I click, they don't even have a cooldown, and I'm like, this is kind of an OP skill that kind of needs like a cooldown or something, which now I'm sure that they're going to add a cooldown to some of these skills. But but Warden, hands down, most flexible class still. Mariner's always going to be limited by that little balance, because if you do need to quickly change something, you might actually push yourself over the edge and stun yourself. So there is that limitation where Warden doesn't really have those sort of limitations, so therefore it's just a little more flexible. Now, I will say too that Mariner is definitely more melee focused and driven, and it's almost like a fencing class, so I do kind of prefer that. I'm not a melee person, and I would normally go for like range skills, but I don't really like the range ability as on Warden. I do feel like Wardens are better with melee overall, but they do have defense, so that's really good for them, and that would honestly give them a major bonus in comparison to Mariner. However, I'm just gonna tell you guys, we've reached near the end of the video, and it's not looking so good for Warden still. I don't know what it is, but I think just judging this based off of newer players coming into the game and playing these classes, I don't think any new player is ever gonna really commit to Warden. I think it's for the more advanced LOTRO players who are doing like the raids and stuff like that, who are just so into it. And unfortunately, I guess maybe I'm just not quite there yet, or maybe I'm just looking at this from a newer player perspective. But Warden's just not going to have that overall appeal for me or newer players going forward, just because it's just too advanced. Mariner is actually a nice challenge. I think it's not too difficult, but it is a little less like forgiving in comparison to like Runekeeper, where like I could just keep spamming my attunement bar that's like totally maxed out on heals. But Mariner, I get stunned. And I think that that alone, just that mechanic alone, makes that class so good in comparison to other classes, but also just slightly challenging. And then when you look at like how the skill combinations work and all of that, it is pretty advanced. It kind of reminded me of Lore Masters in that way, because you really have to keep an eye out on what skills are going to work best with what types of skills and all of that. But overall, I would not say that Mariner is a bad class whatsoever. So sorry, Warden, you are still my most disliked class. Boo! And Mariner, it might honestly be one of the best classes in LOTRO. I might have to update that. I don't know though, because it's still so new. I don't want to say these things yet. But I'm not gonna lie, Mariner is actually a really fun class. And it actually pretty much resembles some of the things I really liked about Burglars. And if you want to learn more about that, I would definitely recommend that you check out my breakdown guide for Burglars level 1 through 20, and more or less what I would do if I made a new burglar today. But as always, I hope that you stay weird, yo weird weirdos.